If you want to cook delicious meals at home with fresh ingredients delivered right to your door, all for nearly 30% less of the cost of going to the grocery store, stick around to the end of the show and I'll tell you how. Justin Jefferson is an absolute nightmare to defend. He's fast, he's fluid, he's got great hands, he runs great routes. He's everything you could ever want in a true number one wide receiver. And the fact that he didn't even start until week 3 and yet he's still on pace to put up somewhere around 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns, that's just incredible production that only 4 other receivers in the history of this entire sport have ever been able to match. Randy, Odell, Anquan Bolden, and Marcus Colston. That's it. That is the entire list of receivers ever that have put up as many yards as Justin Jefferson has in his first 12 games. And so I want to take some time today, not just to talk about the fact that he's good, everybody knows he's a great player by now, but I want to take a deep dive into the little things that Jefferson does that makes him such a great player, and arguably one of the best rookie receivers that we've ever seen. Maybe even better than the guy that's featured on the hoodie that I'm wearing, Stephon Diggs, because for as good as Diggs was in Minnesota and is in Buffalo, Jefferson might be even better. When you look at Jefferson's skill set and you try to narrow it down into what makes up the secret sauce, so to speak, I came away impressed with 3 main things. Number 1, he clearly studies his ass off every single week, and he tends to tailor the routes that he runs to the DBs that are covering him. Number 2, he's great at recognizing pre-snap alignment and either altering or just completely changing his release in general to beat certain techniques and certain alignments. Even when he's running the exact same route from the exact same formation, if he sees a different technique or a different alignment, he's going to change how he runs that route. And then number 3, he's also excellent at being patient in the middle of his routes and knowing that sometimes a DB is going to have really good coverage, and so he's very good at throwing in extra moves and kind of pulling things out of his bag of tricks to get back in control of a route that he's losing late in the rep. Let's start with number 1, and that's studying opponents' tendencies. I'll use this catch against Kyle Fuller from a few weeks ago as an example because it's a nice, long developing comeback route off a double move while Kirk Cousins is rolling out on a bootleg, and it may only be a 16-yard gain, but again, it showed off just how much he prepares and does the work in the film room to get a 16-yard gain against an all-pro caliber corner. As a receiver, when you watch Fuller, you can tell that he excels at punishing comeback routes, out routes, curls, corner routes, basically anything that breaks out to the boundary or works back to the line of scrimmage, because he's always watching the quarterback with his eyes, and he's super explosive when planting and driving downhill to get to the ball. He's basically the modern diet version of Asante Samuel, stylistically speaking. So it takes a special kind of outbreaking route to beat a corner with that skill set that normally feasts on outbreaking routes. And of course, Jefferson does run a special route here. After really driving off the line of scrimmage to eat up as much cushion as he can, he takes a slight rocker step inside to threaten a post route, which gets Fuller to move slightly inside, and then he acts like he's attacking Fuller's outside hip as if he's trying to stack on him and get over the top on a fade route to the end zone. In response, Fuller starts to do what's called a man turn to the outside to open back up and run with that fade, but right when he does that and when he's in the middle of his transition, Jefferson slams on the brakes to run that comeback route. Fuller is so far back and inside because of the nod to the post and the threat of the fade that he can't break on it at all from his position, and Jefferson makes a clean catch for that free 16 yards. Well, not free, obviously, he had to work for it, but he created enough space with his route running to make that catch uncontested. And again, that just speaks to his level of preparedness that he already knows what little moves Kyle Fuller will bite on and what things he has to do to create that space. And keep in mind, he's only in the first 10 starts of his career and he's already doing this stuff as if he's a veteran. That to me is extremely impressive. Now, point number 2, Jefferson also displays an extremely advanced understanding of when and how to adjust his releases at the line of scrimmage based on his opponent's alignment and technique. And what I mean by that is he won't just rigidly run the same route the same way every time. If a corner is playing him differently, he will adjust himself to their technique or to their alignment to get the best results. Take this fade route from the slot in the Atlanta game as an example. Before he gets into his release, he's doing what's called a skip step to help him build momentum before the drive phase of the route. And trust me, we'll get into that a little bit later when we get into point number 3 because that's important. But another benefit of the skip step is that it gives Jefferson a little bit of extra time before he gets into his release to read the defender's leverage and technique at the line of scrimmage so that he can better attack them. On a fade, for instance, one of the main coaching points that a wide receiver coach will stress is that you have to get into the DB's kitchen before you do anything else on the route. If you can get right up on their toes, roughly about a yard away from them, before you release either inside or outside, whatever the route calls for, then that will hold the DB in place for you until the last possible second and keep them from turning to run and stacking on the route. You don't want them turning early to cover that fade. You want them turning late and being a step behind so that you can get vertical positioning over the top. So Jefferson here, to accomplish that, rather than just releasing outside on the route when he was still 2 yards away from the DB, you can see him add an extra step to his release here to close ground within a yard of the defender, get in his kitchen, get up on his toes so that he doesn't turn early, and then once he closed that gap, that is when Jefferson turned on the jets to stack the DB, get vertical positioning on the fade, and finish the play with a nice catch. That is how just a slight little alteration to a release can be the thin line between good positioning and bad positioning. And you can see that difference again in how he ran that same route from the same slot position in the same game. Except this time it was versus slightly different technique from the corner. The second time he ran that fade against Atlanta, the DB was not backed off as much when the ball was snapped, so he was already within a yard of Jefferson. And because that space was already closed, he didn't have to add any more steps. He just took that skip step to read the technique, recognized the distance was already closed, and then released outside immediately on the speed release to go get that vertical positioning. Now, I will give the DB credit here because they did do a much better job this time of staying over the route and playing it from the top down, as defensive back coaches like to say. But even with that better positioning, Jefferson still did come down with it on a really nice contested catch anyway, because, well, he's Justin Jefferson, that's just kind of what he does. But again, it's just so impressive that he can recognize spacing and technique from DBs all very quickly while taking that skip step so that he can adjust his releases on the fly. Most receivers his age do not do that. It takes time for them to learn that skill set, but he's been doing it from day one. Now, point number 3 that I want to talk about is probably my favorite aspect of his game, and arguably the most important too, and that's how he's able to make adjustments late in a route in order to get back in control even on reps where he's losing early in the route. Just like Jefferson gets paid to study his opponents every week, he knows that DBs get paid too, and they're going to study him to take away what he does best as well. And when they do read him well and take away his first move, unlike a lot of other young players that maybe aren't quite polished yet, Jefferson has a lot of counter punches in his repertoire so that he can still get the job done. I'll give you an example of that here. This is just a plain old go route that he won on in the first start of his career against Tennessee for a big gain down the sideline, and it's against Malcolm Butler, by the way. And the main reason why Jefferson was able to win on this route, other than, size, speed, ball skills, all that kind of stuff, is the fact that he won on the release early in the route so that he could win at the catch point late in the route. And what's special about this release, which is called a speed release, is that he's doing the same skip step at the beginning that I pointed out earlier. Some receiver coaches also call it a gather step or a karaoke step. The name of it doesn't really matter because different coaches call it different things, but this is something that you see a lot of top tier route runners do against press coverage. Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, they all use skip steps a lot, and Jefferson does it just as well as any of those guys. What a skip step accomplishes when it comes to speed releases is before you get into the drive phase of the route, which is when you're really going balls to the wall to gain as much ground as possible and get vertical separation, before you even get to that phase, a skip step allows a receiver to load up as much potential energy as humanly possible so that their burst in the drive phase of the route can be as explosive as possible. And I'll go to the broadcast replay of this route to show what I mean by that because it's a bit easier to see there. When Jefferson starts his speed release here, rather than just driving off of this front leg from a standstill to try to get up to top speed, he first loads up with the back leg by stepping even further back and kind of crossing his feet, and then he loads up again with the front leg, but not totally driving off of it quite yet. And then off that second load step, he skips to get his feet, hips, and shoulders all square with each other while his body weight is moving forward. He's in a completely balanced body position at this point because everything is squared up, but more importantly, as I said, he's actively moving forward before he takes that first drive step to get into his release. He's only moved forward by maybe about 12 to 16 inches, so he's not overextending himself into Butler's reach, but the fact that he's in motion means that he has momentum. And since he has momentum, that makes his initial drive step right here extremely efficient because he's not trying to accelerate out of a totally static starting position. That explosive drive step leads to Jefferson getting a good stacking position on Butler down the field so that he can keep control of the route and finish with a nice catch. This was a perfect example of how to get maximum speed out of a speed release against press coverage, and it demonstrates just how advanced Jefferson is even for a rookie. But like I said, DBs get paid too, and they are going to prepare for this. So the very next week in the Houston game, when Texans corner Vernon Hargreaves saw that skip step at the start of Jefferson's release, he immediately knew what was coming. A speed release outside for a go route down the boundary. You can see Hargreaves continuously holding his leverage outside and staying over the top of Jefferson so that he doesn't lose position and get stacked like Malcolm Butler did. And you can see very clearly that when Jefferson takes his first drive step to the outside, he knows that this is not going to work and that Hargreaves can see this route coming from a mile away. But instead of just accepting the loss on this rep and living to fight for another down, what does Jefferson do? He stays composed and retakes control of the route by giving a hard jab and nod inside, just to freeze Hargreaves a little bit and get his body weight moving in the wrong direction. That little misstep from Hargreaves is all he needed, just a tiny little bite, and then he could pick up where he left off with the drive phase of the route, get over the top, turn his head, and look for the ball. Kirk Cousins threw it back shoulder here because he knew Jefferson was a little bit behind schedule because he had to do some extra work to get open, and Jefferson paid that trust off with a great adjustment to find the ball in the air and once again finish the catch. I love showing these two plays back to back because they show not only that Jefferson is a very savvy, veteran-like receiver at the line of scrimmage despite his young age, but they also show that he's got no panic in him at all when the first move doesn't work, and that he can go toe-to-toe with corners to make them wrong even when their first guess was right. Make no mistake about it, this dude is rare. A lot of people wondered after the Stephon Diggs trade if they would ever be able to replace him because he's a top 10 receiver in his own right and one of the game's truly elite talents. And yet I'll be damned if the Vikings haven't done it with Justin Jefferson. Again, he's on pace for 1,400 yards and almost 10 touchdowns as a rookie. That's something that not even Diggs ever did during his time in Minnesota, and that's with Jefferson not even starting the first two games. He is different. He's special. He's one of the best rookies that I've ever seen. And if he keeps this up, which he probably will, he might go down as one of the best Vikings that we've ever seen, period. So a toast to you, Justin Jefferson. Keep doing what you're doing because, believe it or not, you are the only thing keeping Vikings games watchable for the vast majority of Vikings fans. I'll see the rest of you next week. And until then, cheers. Thank you for watching this week's episode, and thank you again to this week's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is the #1 meal kit in America for a reason, and that's because for well over 1 million people, they are the best way to get healthy, delicious, and affordable ingredients for home-cooked meals delivered conveniently right to their door. I tend to be a perfectionist workaholic that is constantly late on all my videos, as you all know by now, so that means during the season I don't have a ton of hours to meal prep or go shopping or kind of make anything home cooked for me and my wife. But in the weeks where I get HelloFresh deliveries, it takes all of the stress out of trying to pre-plan those meals and make grocery lists and kind of go out to the store and all that hassle. It's just so much easier to do it this way. I get fresh ingredients delivered right to me that are all pre-portioned out, so there's less wasted food. And on average, these meals that I get from HelloFresh cost 28% less than if I just bought the same ingredients at the store myself. You can get anything from low calorie to vegetarian or even extra protein if you want it, and there's even some kid-friendly meal options as well if you want to feed the whole family. I cannot say enough good things about HelloFresh, and that's why I've been so happy to work with them for well over a year now. I highly recommend you check them out, and if you're interested, you can go to HelloFresh.com and use my code FilmRoom80 to get $80 off across 5 boxes, including free shipping on your first box. Again, that is promo code FilmRoom80 at HelloFresh.com to get $80 off across 5 boxes, including free shipping on your first box.